Right, so of course, yesterday there was the big first budget of the new Labour government. So, the first Labour budget in 14 years, the first budget ever delivered by a female chancellor. So, that's a milestone in itself, which is to be congratulated. And of course, it was inevitable that I would have to look at it from a motorist point of view to see if some of the extremely bad news that we were expecting, that was almost like, yeah, this is definitely happening, happened or not. Well, I tell you what, I can't, well, I'm going to hesitate to say I'm pleasantly surprised, but what I will say is that there is a giant sigh of relief, a bit of a phew moment here, because we do seem to have dodged a couple of bullets with this one, and it's not as bad as we feared. Now, of course, the thing is that I'm not going to go into all of the aspects of I'm just looking specifically at motorists, at cars, at driving, and also at the automotive sector. I'm not looking at all the other aspects, all the other good and bad. And I should also say that I'm not an economist, I'm not a financial expert, and actually I'm not very good with numbers. Words is my thing. Numbers, what is all that? It's all mystical, magical to me. But I have had a look through all of the various reports and looked at the stuff myself, and this is what I've come up with in terms of how it will impact you, the motorist, and also the industry we love so much, which is the automotive sector. And I'll tell you everything right after this. A brown car guy. Brown car guy. Right, okay, so as I said, the big news is, fuel duty. So it was like almost certain. We were totally expecting that they were going to put up the fuel duty, because it's an easy win, right? It's easy to just fleece the motorists every time you need money. And of course, the Chancellor has been going on and on about the massive budgetary hole that she's got in her accounts, I suppose, which went up from 22 billion to 44 billion to I don't know how many billions now. So it was looking extremely likely that fuel, just as it now had got, I mean, last night I filled up, I think it was £1.32 for petrol. And we've had months and months of high prices. And just now as it starting to come down to reasonable levels, we thought, okay, right, here we go. They're going to put this up again. But the good news is that there is no increase in fuel duty. And not only that, but we also thought that the Chancellor would scrap. You remember that 5p cut that Rishi Sunak introduced as Chancellor back in 2022? We thought that, well, that will be taken away at least, but that hasn't happened either. And so this means that we were expecting to look at fuel tax rates of about 58p per litre, but in fact they're going to be remaining at 52.95p per litre, so about 53p a litre. And this means that the average petrol across the UK would have gone to £1.45.61, and diesel would have gone to £1.50.35. And as I said, now I filled up last night for £1.32. So it is actually quite a big difference. In fact, if we're looking at sort of an average driver doing about 7,500 miles a year, it would have meant about an extra £43 on petrol and another £39 on diesel. That's how much it would have cost extra. So as it is, there is no extra and fuel prices are as they are. None of that is happening. The Chancellor said, I have concluded that in these difficult circumstances, while the cost of living remains high and with a backdrop of global uncertainty, increasing fuel duty next year would be the wrong choice for working people. Wow. So some sort of common sense prevails there at last. The RAC has said that 8 in 10 drivers tell us they are dependent on their vehicles for the journeys they need to make, while 70% of commuters who live in rural areas have no other feasible alternatives to get to work other than to take the car. And it's also remembering, and this is the RSC quote continuing, that as of today, 56% of the total price of a litre of petrol is actually already taxed in the form of fuel duty, VAT, on top of that as well. Now, to be fair, like I said, this was an easy win for them if they had done it, because it would have raised about £3 billion for 2025, 2026. However, they're not doing it. So the fact is that it's a little bit of a win for us now. So that is actually a big relief. Now, the other big question was the ICE new car sales ban. By ICE, I mean internal combustion engines, so petrol and diesel cars. Now, if you remember, this was initially introduced to take effect from the year 2030. And then Rishi Sunak moved it to 2035, giving it a 5-year reprieve. And the Labour, as they were coming into power, the manifesto that they put out, in that they had said that they were going to put it back to 2030. As I've said before frequently, the 2035 doesn't really make a lot of difference, because there's a ZEB mandate. There's another way to describe that, but anyways, just call it the ZEB mandate. Stipulates that a certain percentage of cars sold by dealers in the UK have to be electric, and that percentage rises every year, increases. So this year is 22%, and it goes up, etc. To 2030, when it gets to 80% of all cars that they sell must be EV. And then the 20% allowance is for hybrids, and one presumes that will be plug-in hybrids. And that extends up to 2035, that allowance for hybrid sales. So I guess what they're doing is they're just keeping, there's been no statement on that. In the budget document, it did say the government was committed to phasing out new cars that rely solely on internal combustion engines by 2030, and from 2035 all new cars and vans sold in the UK will be zero emissions. So from reading that, it sounds like they're going to stick with the 2035 deadline. So again, that's two things. There's a couple of things there that I thought were definitely going to happen. They were going to, well, everybody figured they were going to cut that 5 pence, the 5 pence cut was going to be put back, and that they were going to increase fuel duty. That hasn't happened. We also assumed, because they said it in their manifesto, that they were going to change the deadline for the banning of new ICE cars back to 2030. That hasn't happened either. And then the third thing that we all feared was quite likely, and this was because there was a lot of pressure on the Chancellor to introduce a regular form of taxation on electric vehicles, because of the fact that there's more of them around, and so there's less revenue being earned from VED, or road tax as some people know it. And there was like, okay, well, how do we tax EVs? Well, the most obvious way that people were suggesting, and there was being a lot of pressure, and I've made a couple of videos on this, that was being put on the Chancellor, including from the motoring organizations, I should say, was to introduce pay per mile, which is dreaded pay per mile. I mean, this is the horror nightmare that all motorists fear, particularly here in the UK. And it was looking quite likely that, at least for electric cars, that would be introduced. But it seems like we've had a stay of execution as such, because that is not happening either. According to the Treasury, we have no plans to introduce road pricing. We are committed to supporting our automotive sector as we transition to electric vehicles in order to meet our legally binding climate targets. So I guess what that's saying is that for now, no, we're not doing that. But that's because they want to keep encouraging people to move to EVs, and they figured if they do that, then that's not going to be much of an incentive to move to an EV, which is what I've been saying as well. So I guess they're holding off on that. I mean, don't be surprised if this rears its ugly head again in the future, and possibly in the very near future. But for now, that's not happening. Now to some of the bad news. There is a bit of bad news. And primarily the bad news is bad for new car buyers. New car buyers are going to be hit pretty hard. So we're talking again about VED, road tax, Vehicle Excise Duty and road tax. And this is an area where new car buyers, like I said, they are going to feel it. The Chancellor confirmed that the proposed changes in VED are due to take effect from April 2025, so April next year. And EVs, electric cars, will lose their exemption from VED, from that road tax system, from April next year, and buyers will have to pay the next lowest first year rate. So this is the first year rate that they have to pay, which is currently £10. The lowest one is £10, and EV buyers who currently didn't have to pay anything will now have to pay £10. However, instead of paying the standard car rate of £190 a year after that, as is currently the case, EV drivers will pay £10 a year until 2025. 2029 to 2030, which I guess is some good news for EV owners, or EV buyers, I should say. Meanwhile, starting from April 2025, first year VED rates for cars, for brand new cars, this is, with CO2 emissions, they are getting an increase, and in some cases, quite a bit of an increase. So, first of all, cars that emit between 1 and 50 grams per kilometer CO2, and of course, a lot of hybrids, a lot of plug-in hybrids will fall into this as well. Well, they will see their VED go from £10 to £110. So that's a tenfold increase from 10 to £110. Again, first year VED. So this will apply to plug-in hybrids, etc., etc. Secondly, cars emitting from 51 to 75 grams per kilometer CO2. Again, a lot of hybrids will fall into that. That will jump from £30 up to £130 for the first year. And above that, cars emitting 76 grams per kilometer CO2 and above, rates are doubling. So just to give you some examples that I've seen that have been reported across the media. So say if you're looking at something like, well, Ford's best-selling car at the moment is the Ford Puma. It's a fantastic little compact SUV. And if you look at the mild hybrid of that, which is 122 grams per kilometer, the first year VED will now be £440, and that's, like I said, doubled from the 220 that it was previously. But if you go way higher than that, so for example, if you look at a V8 Range Rover with emission of 255 grams per kilometer, the first year VED on that one, I hope you're sitting down for this, jumps from £2,745 currently to £5,490 next year. Wow. You know, and again, like I said, even like smaller cars. So you say, look at a Vauxhall Corsa 1.2 hybrid, emissions of 102 grams per kilometer CO2. The VED will jump from 195 to almost £400, double. Standard rates for VED beyond the first year will also rise, but they'll just rise as they were meant to rise anyway, according to the retail price index. So that's the usual rise that you would get. So there's no dramatic rise beyond the first year, but the first year is basically new car sales are going to be hit quite hard. So I think this is a real, what's happening here is that they're really trying to discourage people from buying new cars with higher CO2. And when I say higher, I mean basically anything more than zero. So that's what's happening here. And by doing this, what they've said, or what the Treasury is saying, is that it's going to raise £400 million next year and £1.7 billion in total by the end of the decade, so by 2030. So in the next 6 years, or 5 years really, because it's 2025 that they're introducing it, isn't it? Which you think that if you're talking about a black hole of 44 billion, then 1.7 billion doesn't really, do anything really, does it? But anyway, that's what's happening. Hope you're enjoying this video. If you are, make sure you hit that like button, comment, share, tell the world. Now, the other thing that, again, with EVs, a lot of EVs are over £40,000 purchase price. And as many of you know, that there is a luxury car tax that has been in place for a while. And that applies to cars that are over £40,000. There's an extra £410 VED charge for 5 years. That is going to be continuing. Despite the fact that there were calls to look at that again, because again, that whole idea of encouraging and incentivizing people to move to EVs, but then people realizing that if they're going to buy an EV, most of which are invariably over 40 grand, they're going to have to pay this additional luxury car tax for 5 years. But the budget briefing document says the government recognizes the disproportionate impact of the current VED expensive car supplement threshold for those purchasing zero-emission cars, EVs, and will consider raising the threshold for zero-emission cars only at a future fiscal event to make it easier to buy electric cars. So perhaps that indicates that maybe in the next budget they might raise that, so say 40 will go up to say 50 or something like that. That could happen, but nothing at the moment. The next one, company car drivers. So they have been enjoying, obviously, the low BIK rates for EVs. The Chancellor confirmed that the low rate of company car tax known as BIK benefit in kind, will remain low from 2028 onwards to continue to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles. So that's, again, those people are buying electric vehicles as company cars. They are going to be continue to be encouraged to do that. As we know, most of the EV sales at the moment are going to fleets rather than to private individuals. But it is going to rise. So the BIK rates for zero-emission vehicles will rise by 2% in 2028 to 2029, and 2029 to 2030 it will go 5% to 9%. So it's sort of a gradual increase that's happening there. Company car rates for hybrids and internal combustion engine cars will rise from 2028 to 2029 to incentivize the take-up of electric vehicles. And this is going to be quite a bit more. So the rate for cars with emissions from 1 to 50 grams per kilometer CO2, so that obviously includes hybrids, plug-in hybrids, will rise to 18% in 2028 to 2029 and 19% in 2029 to 2030. So again, some people are going for plug-in hybrids as their company cars because there is a useful BIK benefit there. But yeah, that's the rate for that is going to increase. And the rate for all other vehicles will increase by 1% per year in 2028 to 2029 and 2029 to 2030. The maximum rate will also increase by 1% per year to 38% for 2028 to 2029 and 39% for 2029 to 2030. This means for vehicles with emissions of 51 grams per kilometer CO2 and more, rates will increase to 38%, like I said, in 2028, 2029, and 39% in 2029, 2030. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your next company car. Potholes, my goodness, potholes are the bane of every driver's life. I mean, the amount of damage they do to cars and the amount that you have to worry about avoiding them, and God knows. The government has pledged an additional 500 million for road maintenance from April 2025. This is for local authorities to repair around 1 million more potholes each year. And this is a boost to what was already there. So what was already there was 8.3 billion. The previous administration had allocated to this, and they've added 8.3 billion, and they've added 500 million. So that takes it to 8.7 billion. So, well, sorry, I told you my maths is crap. 8.8 billion, sorry. So it still doesn't sound like much, does it? Especially when you look at the state of the roads, honestly. But still, because actually, there is the Asphalt Industry Alliance says that it will actually cost 16.3 billion pounds and take about a decade to actually repair all of the UK's roads. So yeah, that's only about half, isn't it? So we're well short. But I tell you what, hey, every little bit counts, right? Because the roads are really, really crap, and something does need to be done about it. So that's good. EV chargers, the other big problem with, of course, people wanting to move to EVs is they're saying that there's just not enough charging. The charging infrastructure is not there. We're just not going to have enough chargers, especially by 2030, which is the deadline for this sort of thing. Well, in support of EV infrastructure, the budget has allocated an extra 200 million to expand EV charging points across England. And so this is good news, because then that should also provide some more incentive. But it's I don't know if it'll be enough. But again, it's let's just take it as good news, especially if you're thinking of switching to an EV. Now, there were some other things. So, for example, there was one more thing I should say actually, and that was this £2 billion. £2 billion. It's interesting because they're raising 1.7 billion from VED road tax, but they're pledging 2 billion to support the UK's automotive industry as it transitions to EVs. What that means, or where that support is going, or how it's going to be deployed, it doesn't seem to really say. It just says that we're going to put 2 billion into that. I looked at the SMMT, Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. So Mike Hawes, SMMT chief executive, said the Chancellor is right to set out measures to address the deficit while investing for future growth. The automotive industry is a growth-driving sector, fundamental to the delivery of the country's net zero ambitions. We therefore welcome today's commitment of £2 billion of automotive transition funding as part of the government's modern industrial strategy. Delivering that strategy depends on the UK being globally competitive. Additional national insurance contributions will put massive pressure on the automotive supply chain, which is predominantly SMEs, small medium enterprises. Next year's spending review must find resources to fund measures that alleviate the strain on these companies to help them transition to an electrified future. A strong manufacturing sector depends on a strong market. The lack of substantive measures to support the new car market, in particular for electrified vehicles, is hugely disappointing, continues the SMMT chief executive. We welcome the extension of the plug-in van grant and company car tax benefits, but these alone cannot drive the growth in demand that is needed. With the sector challenged to deliver the world's most ambitious EV transition targets, why do we have to have the world's most ambitious EV transition targets? But anyway, continuing, achievement of those targets is in serious doubt. There must be an urgent review of the market and regulation, else the cost will soon be felt in reduced UK investment, economic growth and jobs. Right, so I'll just put up this fact sheet, which is quite interesting, just to give you an idea of just how important the automotive industry is actually to the UK. You're probably thinking, what automotive industry in the UK? Surely it's, to be fair, it is a shadow of what it used to be, and you're probably thinking, well, we don't even own it, do we, anymore? But however, having said that, it is an important part of the economy. So if you look at this sheet, you can see that in 2023, more than 900,000 vehicles were built. Over 600,000 of them were exported, so a huge amount of what we make is actually exported. And the industry provides 800,000 jobs, nearly 1 million jobs across the countries, from manufacturers to suppliers and beyond. We've got 60 specialist car manufacturers, 2,500 suppliers, and there's turnover of £78 billion. So £78 billion is the turnover of that sector. So it is massive and a huge and important part of the economy. So looking back at all of this and what's happened in this budget, what does that all mean for us? Well, like I said earlier, right at the beginning, I think we've dodged a few bullets here. Fuel duty remains frozen. There's no immediate jump in the, I'm sure a lot of people were probably filling up petrol ahead of November, but there's no immediate jump. Paper mile is off the table for now. So these are all good things. So, but if you're looking to buy a new car, then you do have to look carefully at the emissions now. I think maybe I should start quoting emissions in all my car reviews now, because that's become an important part of it. Because if you're buying new, what you're actually going to pay for that car not just is based on that. So that's a bit of a problem. EV, people wanting to look at EV and people that own EVs, they will benefit a little bit because the EV charging infrastructure is getting some investment, and the incentivization is still continuing there to urge people to move across, and again, hence another reason why we didn't get paper mile. And though you may be thinking, well, paper mile was only going to be for EVs and they should get it anyway, but keep in mind, as I've said before, if paper mile is introduced effectively for EVs, it will not be long before it will be introduced to the rest of the motoring sector as well. So all drivers will be hit with it eventually, and you can imagine that, as with the CO2, you can see how different the rates are for anything with even more than 1 gram per kilometer of CO2. You can imagine that the paper mile would have that sort of also increasing factor to it as well. So also potholes, like I said, we're getting some more money for that, and of course we're getting that investment in the industry. So I think overall it's way better than we feared, honestly. A lot of, maybe this is one of the things somebody was saying, I think, in one of the shows, was that sometimes they do this, they put out all this negative news so that when the actual budget hits, it doesn't sound as bad as people think it was, and there's probably stuff in there that we then sort of don't realize. So I suppose that's good news. I suppose that's something, at least. And also, I guess it seems to be perhaps some kind of an acceptance and an admission of the importance of cars and the motorists and the car industry to the UK, which is, I think, a good thing. And I think that, if we can collectively, between us, between motorists, between car fans, petrol heads, car communities, also car industries, car bodies, car services, people that provide, the authoritative bodies and stuff like that, motoring clubs, all of these people, if they continue to put pressure and continue to remind governments of how important cars and motorists and driving is in the UK, then perhaps we can continue to stave off some of the worst parts of every time a budget comes around, and motorists seem to be an easy target. Anyway, overall, good news. Anything changes, I'll let you know. Stay tuned, keep it locked to this channel, and make sure you hit the like button so you get more of my notifications. Catch you on the next video. Hi guys, I've been writing. This is my first book, a novel, an all-out action thriller, and this one is a collection of 13 stories I've written over the course of 2 decades. The Ulysses Files and The Quantum Races by BC Guy are out now on Amazon.com. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links. Or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.